We wouldn't be here if it weren't for, at least not in the way that we are now, if it weren't for Sir William Johnson, the settling of Johnstown, and the creation of Tryon County. So we really exist the way that we do today because of his actions.
When we think about the colonial era, and especially the era of the 7 Years' War, it's really a struggle of empires, but it's more than just the European empires. It's more than France and England. There's really a struggle and a negotiation and a diplomacy and sometimes violence between the European empires and the native peoples who lived here, and the indigenous people who called New York home for thousands of years at that point. It was very much a reality that they had to deal with, that they weren't just going to come in and take over.
Everybody was trying to get the natives on their side. Gifting in those days, that whatever nation you're dealing with, either France or England, whoever gifts the best, you're going to side with.
Sir William Johnson was one of the wealthiest landowners in the area at the time. He amassed his wealth coming to the country at the behest of his uncle Peter Warren.
Even though he was only hired by his uncle to be a superintendent of the property, he was eyeing the property that was on the north side, and it was very fertile farming area, and that's what he wanted to get. But of course it belonged to the Mohawks.
He took, I think, to took to a level that was kind of uncommon, because he lived among, they were his neighbors, the Mohawk and other tribes, nations were his neighbors, and he had a deep connection to them, and eventually married into the Mohawk Nation. He treated them for the most part as peers rather than looking down upon them as somehow inferior, or he understood the dynamic of power.
Little by little, he was getting property or buying property from the natives and establishing his little realm here west of Albany.
He had purchased these thousands of acres of land in the Mohawk Valley and decided to establish his own town at Johnstown, named after his son John.
This is where he's going to build his last home. Mind you, when he does build that home, it's getting close to retirement time for him. So this is going to be he's going to establish a town, businesses and all that stuff. He's going to be separate from Albany County.
It's kind of a British system, where you build, there'd be a manor home, a large estate, and then a village of other tradespeople and farmers kind of developing around it. And that's really kind of what he built.
When he began building the town, he thought it would be a great idea to have an entirely new county created from Albany County, with Johnstown as the county seat. So Tryon County was created, named after the last provincial governor of New York, Lord William Tryon.
He was playing the political role too, that, hey, if we split off, And I named the county after the royal governor. I can have a little bit of clout here. When Johnstown was established, the royal governor came here. There was a big ball. All the politicians came here. It was a very fancy thing going on.
And Johnson secured the county seat at Johnstown and immediately went to work building the courthouse and the jail.
Johnson and the government had to kick in money for the building of the courthouse.
It's the oldest courthouse in New York State. It still regularly holds cases and has for 250 years.
It's built of brick. There is a bell tower, a cupola, and the interesting thing is, though, it's not a bell inside. It's almost like a big triangle, a metal triangle.
A teardrop piece of iron that had a clanger attached to it, and you pulled a rope and you made a bell type of noise on celebrations.
It was really kind of the signal for the area around it. They would ring it for 4th of July and for holidays and major events.
Later on, when the Declaration of Independence was read here in Johnstown, the bell clanged. In 1787, when the Constitution was developed, it was clanged. When Yorktown surrendered, it was clanged.
You definitely get a sense that this is a colonial structure. Inside, the original court itself is all wood and has almost like pews. It's almost like a church, kind of when you go in there. That's the sense that I got when I first entered the building.
There was no front porch. You walked in the door and there was a partition. So you walked either to the left or to the right, and there's doorways, and that's how you entered the courtroom. Behind the judge's bench, the court ended. That was it. It wasn't until later on that a later judge had an addition put on to make room for his quarters and stuff like that.
Its current configuration came about in the mid to late 1800s. It contained various lawyers' offices, jurors' rooms, judges' quarters over the years, and now they've expanded on the exterior of the building to include those things. So the courthouse itself is just where the cases are tried and is open to the public.
I think it was William Johnson trying to establish a sustainable outpost in this area of kind of a British presence. It was the manor, it was the village, and it was the courthouse. And the courthouse, both in real terms and symbolically, again, kind of brings law and order and the British government presence to this area. And now there is a place where British law can be dispensed, and some version of what they would have considered, or what William Johnson would have considered civilization, would have been established.
Elizabeth Cady Stanton was a women's rights activist and suffragist.
Elizabeth was born in 1815 in Johnstown. Her father was Daniel Cady, a prominent attorney. He later became judge.
His law office was just a block away from the courthouse, and it was here as a child that she first really got to understand how the law treated people unequally based on sex, race. It was really instilled upon her from a young age that just because she was a woman, the law was not on her side.
Her father was always in court, and she would go and watch him in court. And many of those cases that he was trying had to do with women, and that's where she picked up on it.
She understood from a young age that in order to make any change, she was going to have to do it through law.
He says, Elizabeth, if you want to change the law, you have to go to Washington or you have to go to Albany. And that's primarily how she got started on her campaign.
We know her today as one of the founders and leaders of the women's suffrage movement in New York and the United States.
We were able to have a statue in Sir William Johnson Park.
She's seated on a bench, sitting in a position where she's got her head turned and she's looking at the courthouse.
She's looking into the legal realm that her father would have been a judge in, and where she would have learned, again, the importance of suffrage, the importance of voting for women to institute change, because the only way that they were going to get the change that she saw and that we now know is essential is through getting the right to vote so that they could change the laws. It was the laws that were being upheld by the courthouse and courthouses around the state that were determining that women were not equal. And the way to solve that problem was to allow women the right to vote.
I like to imagine that she's thinking about how far we've come since her fight, which she never actually got to live to see women's suffrage come into law in New York in 1917 and then in the country in 1920.
The courthouse saw colonial British government and colonial British law. It saw the Mohawk Valley as a borderland. It saw the Haudenosaunee be displaced and their power wane and wax over time. It saw changes throughout history that are continuing to this day, and that courthouse is still there, it's still standing, and it's still functioning.
Today is the 250th anniversary of this courthouse in Johnstown.
The Court of Appeals is coming, which is a very exciting and rare opportunity for the state's highest court to leave its chambers in Albany and actually travel out to the Fulton County Courthouse to hear cases. I mean, it's very rare and unprecedented that such a thing would happen.
Going to be one of the first, I think, big trials of how technological we can get.
They are adapting the courthouse for the needs of the Court of Appeals.
The County Facilities Department constructed the bench that the Court of Appeals will be sitting at and hearing argument today. The bench was very small for one judge, and they constructed an entire bench.
It was kind of neat to go through some of the history of the courthouse and have them read that over. They hadn't read any of the background books to it. They've been out over summer vacation, section, their first day of classes today. So that was pretty important to set the stage for what they were going to see.
It's a birthday party. The Fulton County Courthouse is turning 250 years old. Absolutely amazing. This courthouse is a pioneer of justice. It was created for doing all legal business west of Albany, which is, think about that, the territory that includes.
A time in which faith and hard work and grit defined the founding not just of this courthouse, but of this city.
Celebrations like this one that I'm so glad to join you for are important because they provide an opportunity for us to pause and to look back with gratitude for the solid foundations that we have inherited. And also, I think it's important to note that we need to take a clear-eyed view of how our shared history continues to impact us today.
Today, in honor of this anniversary, the bell will once again ring to announce the session of the Court of Appeals.
Hearing, hearing, hearing. All persons having any business before this Court of Appeals held in and for the state of New York may now draw near, give their attendance, and they will be heard.
I think I speak on behalf of all my colleagues when I say we are very, very excited to be here. So, let us begin with today's case, which is number 73, matter of independent insurance agents and brokers of New York versus the New York State Department of Financial Services. Counsel.
Good morning, Your Honors, and may it please the Court. Sarah Rosenbluth for Appellant, Department of Financial Services. I'd like to reserve 2 minutes for rebuttal.
You have 2 minutes.
Thank you. The best interest standard, which has now been adopted in at least 28 other states, is a common sense regulation that uses clear and commonly understood terms to regulate.
The attorneys that had to argue their case, they decided that they were okay with arguing in front of a crowd in these types of festivities. I don't know if I was an attorney, I would want to do that, but they had no problem with it.
For the students, it's a great opportunity to see firsthand the legal system in action and to take part in an essential part of our government and our culture and society.
Are there differences between your regulation and the ones that the industry imposes on itself that somehow, in view of at least one lower court, rendered it vague?
Students became participants because they're AP students in world history last year. They will be AP students in US history this year. So what ties into the courthouse, from everything from Elizabeth Cady Stanton to the building of the courthouse, will tie into curriculum that they will be learning and using this year for their AP exam at the end of the year.
I take advanced placement, politics, leadership, and economics. We're learning about the structure of government and the judicial system, especially within the difference between federal and state judicial systems. And we're learning about the different levels of like civil and criminal cases and the Court of Appeals and state Supreme Courts. And this was an opportunity to see firsthand the difference between this court systems versus other court systems.
Which was about insurance brokers versus New York State.
It is unconstitutionally vague. It reverses your decision in Murphy v. Kuhn. It completely changes the common law standard to be applied here.
I think it was pretty interesting to have that many justices involved, even, not from our court, but even from at the state level in the appellate division. And even the director that oversees those judges came out because she felt that it was that important of a day that she needed to be there.
Bringing our best traditions into the future is something that we as members of the legal community, we as members of the broader community are charged with doing here and now. And that is the power of history.
I don't know when the Court of Appeals has ever left Albany in the modern era to travel somewhere and set up shop in a court and hold cases. We may never see this again in our lifetimes.
I think the students' takeaway for us is that the age of the courthouse, the importance of rule of law, even in a place that was kind of very rural and removed from civilization as it would be in the 1700s, that rule of law is important. And I hope that they take away the fact that we still consider it very important in Fulton County today.
Considering it's one of the oldest courthouses in the nations, I really hope it gets more respect. I would hope it would get out there more, especially just Johnstown as a whole, because it really has a lot of opportunities that I feel like can be taken advantage of.
That building is kind of like a representative of the foundation of our country. It's got a good foundation, and it's been around for 250 years, like our government, and it's worked. It started off as an experiment, and it's still working.
The courthouse is a symbol of a time of transition from the British colony to the United States, and I think as citizens of the state of New York and not the colony of New York, and citizens of the United States and not Great Britain, we have to acknowledge the fact that the court is a symbol not only of that transition, but of the continuation of our own nation's flourishing, and not always easy and not always just, but attempts for justice and attempts for some sort of legal equality that is continually played out today and is a continual struggle.
Courthouse has been a scene not only of legal trials, but also things like anti-slavery discussions about suffrage. There were slave auctions right on the front steps of the courthouse. So these are all things that we can look at and learn from moving ahead into the future. And I hope that our generations will grab onto those ideas and understand that knowing our past is important so that we can do the best that we can to create a better future than we're leaving behind.
We don't have many of these buildings left anymore. Many of the old buildings that were here have long gone. Some of it has to do with land ownership, just getting rid of the old buildings and stuff like that. And I hope the courthouse is kept intact. I hope it's still being used.
As a somewhat small town, we take pride in our historical significance. I think it's very important to celebrate what makes us distinct from other towns.
It's history sensitive. It's got a personality.
The stories of everyday people, your family history, the stories of the people that you know, they may not seem important to you, but they are. They tell the story of our community and how we've grown over the years. Start in your own family and listen to the stories of those who've been around and record them, because you will be very upset if you don't when you have the opportunity. I think it's a great way to learn about our own community's history.